Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today, moderating this exciting conversation on the opportunities and challenges for startups and businesses in Latin America and Silicon Valley. We have an incredible panel of experts with us who will be sharing their insights on the evolving landscape of venture capital, innovation, and cross-border expansion. Today's discussion is all about unlocking new opportunities, so let's dive in and get some valuable perspectives from our speakers. You may have seen when you joined that we put a poll, so if you can answer it, it will give us some insights on what's important for you. Before we get into the heart of our discussion and a short presentation from Dani Ayala, ConexAmericas co-founder, I'd like to ask our guests to briefly introduce themselves. They all bring a wealth of experience from both Silicon Valley and Latin America. So Dani, why don't you start, and we'll come back to you after the short introduction so you can make your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I am a 30-year veteran of the banking industry, having worked at Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, and Bank of America over those 30 years. Retired from banking about 4 years ago and decided to go into the fintech space, and been enjoying the ride and really transforming into a fintech executive advisor and consultant. Known Daniel for about 20 years, and we decided to do this together. So we're very excited. We have an outstanding team of advisors that we're really happy to have on board, and always looking for more people to join the team and help us grow and expand our horizons. So thank you.
So Carol, do you want to continue?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Again, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out there. I've been in the payment space for a long time, and it's been an incredible journey through being one of the founding members of Google Wallet to leading growth for Alipay, bringing Citi into digital assets, and now leading UNO, which is an organization out of Latin America that's gone global in payments orchestration. So it's been absolutely fabulous. And most of my career was spent in Asia, and now I'm spending a lot of time in Latin America and seeing some really pioneering efforts in tech and logistics and e-com. And so super exciting to be part of this venture. I'm going to hand it over to Victor.
Carol. Greetings, everyone. A big background on myself. I'm originally from Guatemala, but I've been living in the US for the last 12 years almost. I did the bulk of my career in telecom. I worked for Millicom for about 17 years. In my last role, I was the chief commercial officer for the group. We're seeing all the business units, mobile, cable, B2B, and mobile financial services, which is where I got started with fintech. After I left the company, it was late 2017, decided to venture in fintech because I saw a huge gap to serve the immigrant community in the United States, to bring them closer to the relatives in Latin America by enabling this community to prepay for products and services from abroad. So that's what I've been doing with my recent company that I co-founded, which is called Oki. And it's been an amazing journey, shifting from being an executive to being an entrepreneur. So happy to be part of this panel. I'll pass it on to Gerardo.
Thank you, Victor. How are you? My name is Gerardo Bonilla. I've been entrepreneuring practically all of my life. Started in the US with a money transfer company. Then after I sold it, I moved to Mexico back and started getting deeper into the payment industry, morely in Latin America, not that in the US. And I built up the last project, a company in Mexico called Cacao. I found that this enabler for payments in Mexico, Visa, MasterCard cards, basically in the beginning. And we got acquired on December 21st by a company called Doc from Brazil. And they are the largest company in payments in Brazil for processing, been sponsoring, also in the acquiring. Really out of the box, the company looking forward to always sell as a service products in the embedded finance solution to get into Latin America. So it is a pleasure to meet you all, to be in this committee with Daniel. I know him for quite a long time, and the rest of the team is fantastic. And I think the purpose of this project it really makes me to be very happy to participate and very engaged. So thank you for inviting me, and we'll be happy to share all my experience with you guys. Thanks a lot. And I pass, I think it's the next one would be, I don't know, Patrice or Rafael. I don't know if I see them.
Yeah, that's
No. Patrice, I see you there. Okay.
yeah. Hi, I'm Patrice. So I'm the other guy with the French accent on the call. I run a consultancy that is helping usually early stage fintechs get to scale, mostly in the US, but I've done work in Europe and in Latin America as well. I used to run my own, well, actually my past two startups were two fintech company. The first one was more in the telecom space, but we had Citibank and Visa as investors. So I got into payment that way in the early 2000s. And I'm quite interested personally in the Latin American market because I have an inclination towards serving the underserved, underbanked, unbanked people. And there's still a lot of them in Latin America compared to the US. So that's a big opportunity. And having been involved in 4 startups, 3 that succeeded and 1 that failed, I sort of know what it takes to raise money when you're not from the US and what mistakes not to make when you are trying to grow a company. And
Yes.
I think Rafael is not
No.
not attend, right?
Yeah, Rafael is not yet here because he had a board meeting.
And is your
somebody wasn't on mute, so I muted him. So I'll do a brief introduction of myself as well before I give the mic to Danny. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I with 3 exits, starting from Europe and then in the US. And I'm also started a group called the BayPay Forum, very similar to ConexAmericas. 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, yeah, it's been a while. We went from 0 to 17,000 members with chapters all over the US and Europe. Unfortunately, I never went to open chapters in Latin America, but that's something we're going to fix with ConexAmericas. I'm also on the board of companies. Well, the last one is tokenization of assets, because I believe that that's a good way for more investors to participate in the wealth of the world. Now said, Danny, and also I'm a CEO of Pacademy, which is a school to teach payments and fintech and entrepreneurship. So Danny, why don't you explain a little bit more about what ConexAmerica is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I'll just share that Daniel was having meetups about fintech before the word fintech existed in the Bay Area. So that's how I met him, and those were the early days where he was inviting not well-known companies at the time, like PayPal or Pay by Touch, to present to a very small group of bankers and entrepreneurs and what at the time were fintech founders, but they didn't call themselves that yet. So it's just kind of cool to see how things have evolved. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about first, before I jump into what we're going to be doing. We want to kind of whet everybody's appetite a bit with sort of the market opportunity that this entails, and this is kind of our why. When we talked about where we are today and what we see in sort of the outlook for the region, the word growth is the only word that comes to mind. It's just a huge opportunity. And while a lot of the opportunities have already been mined in the US and throughout the world, Latin America still has a lot of great ideas looking for investments. And they're not always met locally, so they require attention from the larger sources of funding, and that would be Silicon Valley, and that's what we aim to do. About half the group on this call is from Silicon Valley, and as this slide clearly depicts, the opportunity is significant. The peak was in 2022 at $7.9 billion, almost $8 billion worth of investment coming into the Americas. Obviously, that was kind of the timing for the Silicon Valley Bank debacle and everything else that happened after that, where a lot of the investment dollars kind of started to slow down across the world, and Latin America was not the exception to that impact. while the level of investment dropped significantly through 2023, the outlook for 2024 is fairly positive. Obviously, the growth rate in terms of startups in the Americas is significant. It started slowly with Mexico and Brazil being kind of the two lead countries, and then kind of expanded into Colombia and then the rest of the region. The highest growth right now is actually in the smaller countries, Peru, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, Uruguay, Costa Rica, and Guatemala, registering 44% combined growth between 2017 and 2023, which is notable. So what's the level of opportunity? Right now, it's kind of an interesting crossroad. This group, LabGuy, does a lot of research on the investment environment in Latin America. And a lot of these significant fundings came in 2021, 2022. Typically, these were seed fundings or A-round fundings. And as we know, most of the funds come in at probably give these companies about a year to a year and a half, maybe 2-year runway. So a lot of those are coming up for the next round of investment in order to stay engaged. So we're really at a sort of a crossroads in terms of the region being in high need of investment, as well as not only because of the startups that were already there, but also the significant number of new ones that have come up. If you think about it, companies like Rappi were in seed raising levels in 2020 and 2021, and look at where they are today, right? You look at Mercado Pago, who's really more cash rich than ever, and they're actually going more into debt capital raising than they are at this stage on raising significant funding, because they're already pretty cash rich. So definitely an opportunity as of half of 2024. So the expectation is 2024 will probably come in ahead of 2023, and hopefully 2025 will be significantly higher than 2024. In addition to the Latin American opportunity, the other opportunity is the Latino segment in the US. So it's a lot of, the Hispanic population in the US is number one, the fastest growing population in the country. Number two, the economic opportunity for companies that operate within the United States or in Latin America looking at the US is quite significant. And you see a lot of startups throughout the US, and especially coming out of Miami, where there's a lot of focus on the opportunity to leverage the economic power that this segment brings to the table. From that perspective, when you look at the fact that there's two key growth points here. One is, the level of growth from entrepreneurs starting businesses that are focused on the Latino segment and are Latinos themselves is about 3 times the level of the mainstream in America. So that's where the dollars are coming in to fuel the economy. And as you know, the fuel to the US economy, as everyone knows, and any economist will tell you, is not large corporates. It's the small business growth. It's quite significant. And although 1 out of every 10 survives and the other 9 drops out of the race within a year, it still fuels a lot of economic growth and development in the US. So this is critical to the US economy. And as a result, whatever investments are being made into that segment, as well as the consumer segment, is quite important and relevant. $3.2 trillion, $3.6 trillion in total economic value for this segment in the US, which when you look at it, from a global perspective, they will be the 5th largest economy in the world if you looked at it as that. So with that, I told you our why, and who's working on these, and of course everyone here is invited to take part of these. But we basically have set out 6 objectives. We're starting really with the top 2, which is providing expertise and insights, and we won't be able to do this alone. We need people to help us build this ecosystem together. We're looking to partner with other organizations. Coming from Silicon Valley, we're not proprietary about much. Really, we're very open, a very open architecture. So we would like to invite other entities who have knowledge, contacts, network to be a part of us and participate in our sessions and or our events as we grow in size. Networking and collaboration is critical, and that's really the the nature of fintech today. You go to any conference and you see absolute strangers talking to each other for 10 minutes and then ending up doing deals 2-3 months later. So absolutely, the networking and collaboration is really important to us. Looking at the regional opportunity insights, whether it's Latin America or the Latino segment opportunity in the US, helping people understand the opportunities, helping back up those pitch decks that you are building, helping you identify potential investors, potential team members, as well as advisors, which is a number of us are advisors as well. So, you know, obviously there's an opportunity there. And then, you know, the three things that are key for a lot of founders, and sometimes they sort of shy away from it initially until they realize if they don't do this well, they're not going to be able to survive, which is being able to get effective training and coaching, having hands-on advisory support, and then obviously keep providing access to venture capital funding. There's about 4 or 5 firms that are dominating right now the venture capital space in Latin America, but there's probably about 100 of them behind them trying to get into the market and trying to understand it. So look at it all, we're trying to really be a facilitator or a conduit so that we can help people connect with the right counterparties in order to grow their business, to staff their teams, and to move into the next stage of development. And we have a great team to make this happen, so we are extremely excited about this. I'll pause there and we can move on to the next section where Daniel is going to facilitate a couple of questions and answers from our team. And obviously, you in the audience, we invite you to participate as well. Go ahead, Danny.
Okay, thank you, Danny, for sharing all these valuable facts and data. So let's start by focusing on opportunities. And this is where things get really interesting. Rafael, Danny, Patrice, you've all been at the intersection of Latin America and Silicon Valley for years. From your vantage point, what are the most significant opportunities you see for Latin American startups and businesses looking to make their mark in Silicon Valley? So who wants to start?
Well, I'd be happy to start, but I would expand the question to also opportunities for US entrepreneurs who want to get into Latin America. As I said in my introduction, I'm particularly personally interested in serving the underbanked market, people who don't have proper means of payments and live in a cash economy. And that's still a fairly large portion of the population in Latin America, about 23%. So that's 150 million people over there who do not have mainstream access to banks. So for all of the neobanks and virtual cards and all these new technologies, banking from your phone, or your phone is your bank branch, there's that huge opportunity. There's also an interesting factor, which is Latin America has a very high penetration of cell phones overall. Actually, the second highest penetration of cell phones in the world is Brazil, just after South Korea. So there's no technology impediment. Everybody has a cell phone, and that's also something that can be leveraged instantly. Another one, which I think is really interesting, is that culturally, people in Latin America are less, how should I put it, reckless with their money than Americans. They're more careful about credit and not getting into debt than Americans are. And so I think the ability to deploy some form of credit in an innovative way in Latin America is probably better than it has been in the US. The US market is very saturated around credit, and I'm not sure that buy now, pay later is going to be a good solution. So I think this is the reason why I believe entrepreneurs, both from Latin America and from the US, should be really interested in that market, regardless of the remittances between the North and the South, which are also obviously an opportunity, but it's already a pretty saturated market, and there may be some benefits at the margin if you use stable coins as opposed to traditional methods of transmission. But the opportunity is really, it's probably safer to do credit. It's, there's a large population that is demanding financial services in a digital way, and they have the means of accessing those services in a digital way because they have smartphones.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Danny, you're also well connected in Silicon Valley. Do you want to add to what Patrick said? You're on mute.
Sorry. I actually echo everything that Patrice said, 100%. We walk on a similar path. I would say that the untapped potential of addressing the needs of consumers is many times larger in Latin America than any part in the world. And I think the level of adoption that you tend to see with these new technologies tends to be a lot higher, which actually draws an interesting observation. In countries like Colombia, it was actually the banks that decided to fintech themselves into the market. So the two largest banks, they actually issued the first two wallets in Colombia as a preemptive move, but more importantly, to actually capture market that they didn't have and they couldn't get because of their branding visibility and perception that it was banking for the rich. And so the two largest banks, consumer banks in Colombia, went out and launched their wallets. And I think they're probably one of the two largest wallets in the Americas today. Now there's obviously a lot of fintechs coming into the scene, but that's a peculiar observation that, adoption wasn't an issue. So there is a market ready. And in the US, the same thing proves positive. You look at Remitly, one of the largest remittance companies that went from zero volume and zero revenue in a period of about 8 years to moving about north of $10 billion worth of value from the US to Latin America and the rest of the world. So there's a captive market. The question is, are you able to pull through your idea and find the funding to execute? There's no question in my mind that there is a significant amount of opportunity, both in the US with this market as well as throughout the Americas.
Well, definitely. Yeah, I've seen also, I'm mentoring at Plug and Play, and there are a lot of corporates there coming from all over the world, but also Latin America. And so what they're looking for is to be connected with the ecosystem of startups in Silicon Valley to be able to bring this technology or these ideas to their own markets. So that's also something to consider. So thank you, Danny and Patrice, for your answers. So let's talk about money and opportunities, because there's been so much happening in this LATAM VC scene lately. So you mentioned Rappi, but there are many others who are a little bit less known. Gerardo and Victor, you've all deeply plugged into the space. What's catching your eye in terms of how Silicon Valley or how venture capital is evolving in the region? And for those US-based VCs watching us today, what opportunities should they be paying attention to? So Victor, you want to start?
Sure. So I think, the VC environment has been picking up on the trends that you see in Latin America and the evolution that we've seen. As I mentioned at the beginning, I was part of the telecom industry for close to 2 decades. And one of I recall this, early 2000, late 2000s, early teens, M-Pesa in Africa. That was way before we had smartphones. And what we realized is once you set the pipelines in place, technology takes care of itself. If the regulatory environment makes it feasible for those ecosystems to evolve and develop. In Milligan, we tried to replicate the M-Pesa model. We were successful in some markets, not in all of them. But one of the things that we realized is as technology continued to evolve, smartphones came into play, smartphone penetration started to rise in Latin America. You start to see how this underbanked economy rapidly begins to evolve. And you start to see a lot of closing of the gap of the underbanked and underserved. You have companies like Clip in Mexico that are making it feasible to make payments in mom and pop stores with a phone practically. That's a huge technology, because remember, Mexico tends to be a predominantly cash economy, and with technology such as Clip, those merchants that typically only accepted cash, now all of a sudden they can accept other means of payment. So internet access and smartphone penetration, as Danny mentioned, are obviously driving, a change in the trend. Another thing that I would submit is, in the digital space, there are no borders, if you think about it. And Danny mentioned about the Latino community in the United States being the 5th largest economies. And keep in mind that remittances flowing south tend to represent about 5% of that GDP. It's close to $160 billion flowing south. And with the facilities that you have being connected with a smartphone, it doesn't matter if you're standing in Mexico, in Brazil, Argentina, or in the US. Every day now you start to see more technology that makes it easier to do peer-to-peer transactions that in the past would not be feasible, particularly for this immigrant community who, not for the most part, become very active in the financing structure way with banks. Have been picking up on these trends. One of the things that sometimes makes it hesitant to invest is that they look more at projects predominantly in Brazil and Mexico that tend to be 50% of the Latin America GDP. But I think they're starting to see more venture going into other markets. You see successful companies that are setting camp in a market like, I think there's in the region as well, and expanding. They're also providing banking services beyond just the delivery solution with which they started. So I think they're starting to pick up on the notion that, investing in Latino founded ventures can actually have the capacity to scale in the global stage and actually be potential good vehicles for large exit. And I think that's really paving the way to change a dynamic that in recent years, Danny was mentioning, how much of the funding has been deployed for startups. Unfortunately, the Latino entrepreneurs have not been at the receiving end of that money that's flowing into investment as much. Less than 5% of all the top 25 VCs and private equity have invested in Latino led ventures. So there's an opportunity there, because I think Latinos are very hardworking. They are looking to bring to market solutions that have been successful globally, and they're helping to close the gap in these underserved economies that present a huge opportunity. But with that, I'll pass it on to Gerardo maybe, so we can share the mic.
Thanks, Victor. I agree with you with most of the situation here with the venture capital and investments in Latin America. I see also like the market is here, technology, and even though regulation for most of the payments, fintech industry in Latin America, I think we passed an era that was very strong for seeds in 2020, 2021. And that was a boom, particularly in Mexico, Brazil. And I see now that most of the investments are going more into an A, different than seeds. So I think they need to start looking a little bit more with like probably in the 2021 to the seeds, because that's the one that will be kicking. But of course, from 21 to 24, we cannot see a lot of exits today that will bring, that endorphins for the investors in the region. I see that it's moving, it's growing, but I think they are moving more in the a little bit more growth in these companies. But definitely the projects that I see in Latin America are incredibly. I think the trends are moving in payments globally now, even though with stable coins or crypto, regulators are now taking those kind of payments as valid. That makes a lot of sense. and opens a lot of opportunities, I think, in different sectors of this industry that we're looking. I see in agro right now, it's getting really hot. The agro, the way that they can bring this technology to evolve the agro market. And when we talk the agro in Latin America, we're talking about the underbanked. So that's a good place to start, a good place to put money in, because there is a big opportunity to really develop technology in this area. So I see that in my opinion, I see with venture capitals moving forward. It's kind of reacting, even though it's not the best year that I've seen investments for seed rounds. But I think it's moving in that direction. And of course, all the people that are joining us here, that's our purpose. That's what we're trying to do, to direct these opportunities into the right hands, and to them to understand how can we leverage these great opportunities, these great leaders and entrepreneurs, to get the right partner to develop their investments and projects in Latin America. So I think that'll be my opinion here on this part of business. I see they are getting a little bit more interested in Latin America. Of course, we definitely need money from the US, which is the largest, as you, Daniel, mentioned, in Latin America for seed projects.
Thank you very much, Gerardo and Victor. So I have another question for you on the same topic. So we've seen in Silicon Valley that you have these big successes like PayPal and others, and then you have this what we call here the PayPal mafia, who are starting new businesses. You have also people who succeeded because there was an exit event, either an IPO or an acquisition. Now you start seeing these people investing in other startups. And that's what creates really this ecosystem, not just the VCs with big funds like Sequoia and so on. But on your side, in Latin America, do you see this coming? Because if you don't have successes and a lot of money, it's restricted to a certain number of people who have been always wealthy. But what about the new generation of wealthy people? Do they invest in startup? Do they take the risk in their own region?
Well, if I can just add something here, Daniel, I definitely think yes. More the family offices, I see that they are getting attracted to reinvest, to start looking for different paths than the typical or traditional VCs. So that's also interesting. And I see also angels, a lot of people, individuals that are really committed with entrepreneurs and projects. So there is that money, and in parallel with technology, I think both, they are really helping to bring these projects live and do a proof of concept with real, and not to spend a lot of money just to have a first MVP to show that the project can do or can grow and expand. So definitely, yes, I see that these family offices and individuals are willing to invest. And that's I think you're right, Daniel. That's probably the most important sensor we can see, because the belief and the appetite for them to start putting money in these projects, it really, I think, push even though the VCs for a second round to accompany these investments.
But if I could add something, at the core of your question, Daniel, is the issue of scalability. And when you invest in companies and you want to be successful, you need scale. And I think Latin America is going to have the same scaling issue as Europe and Africa, because Latin America, even though it's got 66 million people, so way more than the 350 million in the US, but this is 650 million people divided by 33 countries, 44 countries in Europe, 1 billion people in Africa, but 54 countries. And in Europe and Africa, what we've seen when people are successful is a not invented here syndrome, where if you're successful in your own country and you decide to stay in your home country for the first 18 months, 2 years of operation of your company before you expand internationally, it can backfire, because the more successful you are in your country, the more reluctant your neighbors are going to want to adopt your technology. This is why M-Pesa in Kenya never got to its neighbors, failed in India, failed everywhere else, because they were very successful in Kenya, and people around say, well, yeah, but the government was involved, they got subsidies, you know, etc., etc. We have to acknowledge the fact that, and this is the same in Europe, you know, why don't we have a PayPal in Europe? Because Europe is 44 different countries. Yes, it's now one and a half currency, but still. So we have to face the situation where, as seen from the US, the people at PayPal and other places did not suffer from this, because if you develop something in the US, you have access in one go to 350 million people, 2 languages, you know, American and Spanish. But there are differences in regulations from state to state, but you don't have that not invented here syndrome, which is pure psychology, where if you've been successful in something, the rest of your footprint does not want to adopt what you have. And I think we have to keep that in the back of our mind, because if some startup company is extremely successful in Colombia, and only in Colombia for the first 2 years, they're going to have a very difficult time to move to other countries. And we just have to be aware of that. And that will probably have nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with psychology and politics.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Victor, you
it's
want
a
to
good
add
point.
something?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I think Patrice, you're right. And I think the biggest hurdle tends to be the regulatory framework more than the technology, if you will, because I think you mentioned the PESA, the technology was SMS. I mean, it wasn't, very complex technology behind the venture. But you're right. The Kenyan government facilitated the regulatory framework for that to take hold in Kenya at the time, which was unattainable in other markets. One of the things I would submit for the region in Latin America is that we have to think of it, even though you're right, it's many countries, but culturally tends to be very similar. I don't think there's a lot of holding back in terms of the not invented here syndrome, I would submit, but rather it's overcoming the barriers that you face in the regulatory frameworks, that one solution deployed in one market doesn't really translate, not because the language is not the same or the technology works, but rather once you set it up in a different regulatory environment, it doesn't really create the enablers for that to take off. And I think there's some progress being made. There's a lot of fintech associations that are starting to work together in the region, trying to ensure that whatever is working in some of the markets, we can replicate good practices, thus reducing those, the boundaries that you have physically, that they become diminished in the digital space, which makes a lot of sense. Gerardo was mentioning cryptocurrency. You tend to see some of that adoption already in some of the markets, just because it becomes an enabler. There are really no barriers, no boundaries of what you can do with crypto. So it really will depend on how the governments actually want to play fair to make the barriers to entry comparable one market to the next. And I think that's really what could actually be the detonating factor for scalability in the region. That if we do make it, it's huge.
Yeah, if I may add, I agree with what you both are saying. I find that behavior in Central America, where definitely the fintech associations are starting to work closer together. Probably leading the pack are Guatemala and Costa Rica most successfully, but the other countries which are a little bit behind are finding that working with their brothers and sisters in the other countries, they're getting better access and better opportunities, not only in terms of funding but also resources. I mean, the cost of an engineer in Central America puts what people are paying for in some other parts of the world in the opposite time zone as the US to shame, and you actually find very good English speaking skills as well. So you look at some of the new startups that are offering that freelance opportunity to engineers in the Americas, extending it into the US, and most of them are being very successful. So that definitely paints kind of an additional picture there.
I think there's also, though, an underappreciation for how challenging it is to prosper in Latin America. And I think that companies that do incredibly well, it's that adage, right? You can make it anywhere. I think that's more true of Latin America than anywhere in the world. And so those companies that are really doing well have had to really overcome all the fragmentation, all the nuances with different types of payments, all the regulatory complexity. And the fact that they're able to do this in testament to just how industrious and how talented this group of people is. And so, we were talking about Rappi, for example, and PayPal Mafia. Well, there's a Rappi Mafia that's starting. And actually, the company I'm with is the founders of Rappi. It's, same founders. But what we're finding is as we globalize, for example, and many other companies globalize outside of Latin America, there is, I think, a lack of understanding from the broader world about just how strong these organizations are. Because again, to thrive in Latin America, the rest of the world is almost easier, right? In many ways, because there is one language, there is the regulations are not that different. But and I think this is one of the things to really where awareness and education is needed, is that these companies in LATAM are really strong and scrappy and doing some really pioneering work. And I don't think that's appreciated across the board yet.
Yeah, so that's a good transition to my next question. So Carol and Danny, you had a front row seat watching US-based companies make their move into Latin America. What are the main hurdles they are running into? And since you're all here with ConexAmerica, how can we actually help these companies turn these challenges into opportunities?
Yeah, it's understanding the fragmentation, and there is a lot of it. And I think that's, whether as a Google and we looked at LATAM, whether I was at Citi or we're doing a business in LATAM or early stage, there's local is very important. And I think the understanding of the local market, Mexico does act very differently than Brazil, for example. And PIX is, a growing form of payment, whereas in some markets, there are APMs that are dominating. So I think the biggest challenge is understanding the nuance and the importance of localization when trying to deploy a global strategy or a global product. It has to be really, really localized, I think more so in Latin America than I think in other parts of the world. Oh, Patrice or Danielle?
Yeah, so I would say, there's probably others that would agree with this. Probably the first one is the regulatory complexities and nuisances in each country. They're very different. I mean, you go from one country to the other, and what's kosher in one geography may not be in another. There are countries that are still banning crypto today, and so people may be using crypto underground, but they're banning it still. There are countries that have not made a decision on their standing on crypto, or even stablecoin, which is, I mean, even easier to define. So I would say that's the number one. The second one, I would say political and infrastructure, right? I mean, I think those are the two that typically come up. On the political side, there's always uncertainty in certain countries in terms of, who's coming in as the new ruling party and what effect that will have. I think you look at Mexico, they're just going through a presidential transition, probably went through a very difficult period with his last president. And I'm not making a political statement, I'm making a general statement about the state of the country. At the same time, the less impoverished communities and disadvantaged communities in Mexico, especially the indigenous side, got on the spotlight during this period of time. And you have to keep in mind, and I'll correct, someone said that, Latin America has 3 languages spoken now, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. There's also actually over 2,000 dialects spoken in Latin America through about, thousands of different indigenous tribes that speak different languages. Just in Guatemala alone, there are 30 plus different dialects of Maya. And there's actually some startups that are offering solutions in making life better for this indigenous community. So I'm not gonna get on that whole issue, but overall, I would say those are the top challenges that the market has. And I think the last one is finding the right combination of local and foreign human capital to make it balance. You know, I had the opportunity to work with a fintech that was based in LA, and you know, only 3 out of 100 employees were Latinos, yet their target segment was the Latino market. And I always scratched my head and said, you know, what's going on here, you know? So I think that's the same on the other side. Sometimes you find some of these startups being run by people from Sweden. It's a good example. And, you know, where is the balance of knowledge and culture? And you know, when they get out to market, will they have those cultural references? So that's that. I don't know, Patrice or...
Yeah, just wanted to add one thing about the earlier comment on infrastructure ingredients for scaling. One thing that Europe has done well is standardize a bunch of open APIs for banking, and that's why companies like N26 and Revolut have become very significant, because they were able to deploy simultaneously in multiple countries. I'm a little bit worried about whether or not there will be any open banking APIs in Latin America. In the US, we're not in a good place. The CFPB just issued a rule for open banking, and the first reaction of the banking association is to sue them and to say, no, we don't want that, right? If you have to learn a way to connect to your partner bank differently from one country to the next, it's going to be also, you know, probably an interesting challenge in addition to the regulatory challenge. So I do hope that at some point, either the European flavor or the future American flavor of open banking will spread into Latin America, but I don't know enough to figure out whether is this imminent, or are we going to go through 10 years of not having any standards?
Yeah, thank you very much for your insight. Yeah.
I actually have a comment on that.
Okay.
It's interesting because I think the US is actually overregulated to an extreme. And the lobby of the financial institutions in the US is significant and very powerful, having been an insider for 30 years. I would say in Latin America, the clout of the establishment is almost equivalent, but their agility to move as quickly as their counterparts in places like the US is less. And often they will dismay or ignore some of these new innovations to their own shame, because typically by the time they want to stop it, it's already grown very quickly. There's a number of fintechs that you could point at that probably most banks looked at them and said, there's no chance they're going to be anyone significant. And now they are. I mean, if you look at Mercado Pago, which is kind of the Amazon of the Americas, becoming a key leader in payments, it's almost like a Trojan horse strategy to become a very important player in the payment space, with most of the establishment thinking it's really more of a commercial play for buying and selling products, and really now it's becoming a payments engine for the region. So I think there's some of that, and I was listening to someone speak recently from Colombia, and there's like 4 startups already talking about DeFi in Colombia, which is really, you know, a very positive trend to see in the region. At some point in time, they'll probably get the brakes on them from their regulatory perspective, but it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I have a theory, which is every company will be a fintech company in the future because of embedding payments and financial services. So, but just my humble opinion. So I have many more questions for you, but we arrive almost at the end of our session. So I would like to us to look a little bit ahead for a moment and paint a picture of the future. as advisors or co-founders who are helping shape ConexAmericas' journey, I'd love to hear from each of you. What does real, meaningful success looks like for ConexAmericas? And more importantly, how do you see yourself helping to turn that vision into reality?
I can start. I think for me, a huge success would be in a couple years from now that we have at least a dozen Latin American companies that are household names. I think that would be very valuable and helpful to the entire ecosystem for that to happen. And I think the way in which we do that is through more awareness and education as to just how vibrant a lot, like Rappi, for example, keeps coming up here. Well, a lot of people, although it was rated top 100 most influential companies in the May issue of Time magazine, still so many people outside of Latin America have no idea who Rappi is. So I think a success would be to make a lot of these companies become household names, small and large. That's for me.
If I may add,
Yeah,
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, well, okay, fantastic. No, if I may add, I think in order to make those companies household names, I think if we can, create a bridge for funding to actually be allocated to good ideas and opportunities that are, sprouting out across the region, I think that would be fantastic. I think Latino entrepreneurs, culturally are very hardworking. And there are very big opportunities in Latam, very good ideas that unfortunately are not having the same funding and backing to really reach their full potential because they run out of runway more than anything. It's not that the idea doesn't have merit. You look at the KPIs, you look at the fundamentals of the business. So if we can shed some light into those opportunities for VCs to start to see them as, scalable opportunities that can have the type of exits that they're looking for, and we can facilitate maybe the cultural translation, not the language, because I think the language is not usually the issue. It's the cultural translation that needs to happen so that they feel more comfortable in deploying resources to the region. I agree with Carol. Many companies can become global household names.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know yet at what stage the companies that may participate in ConexAmerica or connect to us or ask advice from us will be. If they have already established in one country and they want to expand, so they're in the scaling phase, I completely agree, making sure that some of these established companies that have already proven that they have the tech, the market, and the people, getting them to become household names by expanding in some way, shape, or form would be an excellent metrics. I think we are going to also have early stage, 5 guys in a garage or in a shared office space type of companies that will approach us that have not figured out yet how to get to cash flow positive. We get a lot of that in Silicon Valley, right? People with PowerPoint and not much else, right? And this, here, this is, the usual success factors when these companies approach VCs is, hey, are these companies going to die at the usual rate that we see in Silicon Valley, which is 95% of these companies don't make it to their 5-year anniversary. And so if this can be, a little bit better than 95%, that would be good. I think we also should be fairly candid and transparent with the early stage people to make sure that they don't try to do something that is almost guaranteed to fail. There's a lot of innovators who are confused and they think that their innovation is a company, but their innovation is actually just a feature in someone else's product. And I think we should be open, saying, hey, you know what, why are you creating a company? You should go and pitch your product innovation to a company that we have in our Rolodex, right? And so this is a service we could provide to people saying, hey, maybe you cannot build a company and then go IPO or get acquired, but you could build a technology or a product and get that product adopted by someone else, and you become successful and you become an employee of that company or an advisor. I think we need to be able to measure that as well as a success factor. It's a little bit wishy-washy, I agree, but it could be important because unfortunately there will be maybe even a majority of the people who find an interest in ConexAmerica will be in that category of early stage people who have not proven themselves yet and are looking for ways to prove themselves.
And Patrice, I totally agree with you. And I want to add something here, which is what I see like the chicken and the egg in the situation. The venture capital, you just mentioned a very impressive rate of, I cannot say failures, but they don't get to the next stage, 95% of them. And I think there is also because the thesis of the VCs are looking for projects out of this world. So all the projects must be looking, like to get like 100x return. And I think that gap also makes some of these players to lose the floor easily. So probably our would be this to sense the venture capital and also the projects, not to be looking for that rock star that will fly that high, but definitely something that will make sense and really close that gap, because I see that 95%, and I saw a lot of in Mexico that didn't make it with very good projects, but the expectation was so big. So you're totally right. They cannot get to that point and got an exit the way they expect in 5 years.
Yeah. I would add to that. And actually, Gerardo, you lived that journey with your original startup that eventually you sold to Doc. I mean, you went through the entire journey. It was impressive to see it over a number of years, and you won at the end, right? So I think definitely that's a key challenge. I would just add, I think the way I see success for us is really becoming a marketplace of talent and connections, one, and two, a resource of information and clearinghouse of data. And finally, hopefully get a couple of good friends in high places so we can help seed some of the key unicorns of the next decade. That's sort of my sort of north here is helping some of the incredible founders you find in the region to make it happen by helping them get the connections and access to funding that they need.
Thank you very, very much, Danny, for this all these good discussions, and I hope that everyone found the insights as valuable as I did. And before we close, I want to mention that this is just the beginning. We want to have some exciting future events. We're planning already some online, but I hope that at some point we'll be able to do these live events where people can meet face to face in the near future. We have also different topics like raising capital, how to grow, cross-border, how to source talents on both sides, actually, the US and Latin America. And so we hope that you'll keep connected and informed. So to stay connected, you can follow our ConexAmericas page on LinkedIn, join our group also on LinkedIn, and you can also subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/@ConexAmericas to see the recording of our meeting today. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and a special thank you for our panelists for sharing their expertise.